Minute here for everybody to join in. As you're joining in, go ahead and check in with us at the chat below. Say hi. We're excited to have you here, and we want to hear from you. We want to know what you guys are up to. So welcome to the show as you're coming in. We'll get started here in just one more minute. Very exciting day, and I think we've got the bugs worked out from last show.
Yep, for most of the part.
Yes.
It seems like we're on a good roll right now.
Yes, we're good. We had some audio issues last time. So it's the top of the hour. We're about ready to get started. So let us go ahead and dive into today's show. So I'll get us started. Welcome to the PoE Texas live stream, Converge PoE. If you're interested in getting the most out of your network infrastructure, whether it's land-based or whether it's way out where nobody can reach it, this is the right place. Based on so many requests, and a lot of people have asked about this, we've reached out and gotten a solar expert to join us on today's show to talk to us about solar-powered PoE projects. Whether you want to add a remote streaming camera or a security camera, or just see how to add PoE to a cabin or some remote building that you've got out there that's not connected to a network, our guest today in our conversation will be all about that. So break out your toughest questions, everybody. Get on the chat line. We have Maria manning the chat lines, and we'll do the full introduction in just a second to make sure your questions get answered, and give us your input on what tough projects you would like to learn about. So Rob and I can do some follow-up videos and get you what you need to know and answer your tough questions. Then stick around for our exclusive announcement on new video and content coming up about solar, PoE, and hardware. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Most of you know me, Tyler Andrews, the CEO here at PoE Texas, and as always, my wonderful co-host, Miss Maria de Medel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Before we introduce our guest host today, though, I know this may be the first live stream for a lot of people out there. So I want to do a quick demo to show you how to do comments, because commenting and participating is such an important part about a live stream. It's the difference between just a standard block webinar and getting out there and integrating and participating. So your comments, your feedback, it'll help guide the conversation. It'll help guide where we go today and get you some of that great information.
And that's what we're here to do. We're here to interact. We want to hear from you guys and see what you're interested in, what your questions are. We want to interact with you, so send all the questions.
Yes. So with that, I'm going to try and bring up the desktop display here. Let's see if I can make this work. So bring this over. We'll save some of that for later today, but I'm going to bring up our this is my first time doing this, so I appreciate y'all's patience with this. I've got our live stream up here. We'll start with Facebook. If you're looking here at Facebook, that way, what you're going to see is when you're watching the Facebook live stream here, it's if you want to comment, you simply come down here to the comment section, click comment. Don't forget to like and share this with your friends. But go ahead and write a comment. Give me a smiley face. Give me a I'm tired of hearing Tyler talk about commenting. Or put a comment here. So welcome, and my spelling is great, I know. Welcome to the show. And that just popped up, and it's going to be on our feed. We're going to see that, and we're going to be able to talk about it. Now, I'm going to apologize for you Facebook users and viewers today. There is an integration problem with Facebook we have not been able to solve. Your comments are coming to us. We're monitoring them. We may not be able to throw them on the screen, but Maria's there for you.
I have all the questions.
She will make sure you get represented. And then for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see my beautiful delayed timing here. Very easy to comment. Just come over here and join the chat. So that's odd. Oh, it wants me to get on an account, unfortunately, but the chat is right here on the bottom right. Just type in your messages. Say hi. Let us know what you're thinking. Those will pop up on our screen, and we'll use those. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please comment. Please share. We love to hear from you, and this is a very exciting time. So with that, I'm going to go back to Maria to introduce our guest star today.
Yes, hi everyone. So thank you again for joining us. We're excited to have you all. I want to introduce you to our guest expert today, Mr. Rob Rallo. Rob has been working in the solar power industry since 1990 with the goal of designing cost-effective systems that meet user needs. He specializes in battery-based off-grid systems, as Tyler was mentioning earlier, those off-grid setups. And he actually has been involved in and been part of the IEEE working group and has involved and been personally in the development. So sorry.
Tongue-tied today.
It's one of those days. But he's personally been involved with the development of IEEE 1561 and 1562. And what those are, the industry standards for guide of optimizing the performance and life of acid batteries and hybrid systems, and the design for guide for standalone PV systems. So he's personally helped develop those standards. And right now, him and his wife currently live in South Maryland, where he loves to enjoy fresh local seafood, most of which Chesley gets to catch himself. We don't have that luxury here in Central Texas.
He's a fisherman. Wow.
He is. And right now they own several dogs, and they work together with various animal rescue organizations, so we love that. But we're happy to have you, Rob, so welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Let's bring him on. Hey, Rob, welcome to the show. We're really excited to have you.
Hi, happy to be here today. Glad, and I hope I can help people understand some of the off-grid applications out there, and hopefully make them feel a little less intimidated about going off-grid on some of their projects and applications. It is quite doable. The stuff does work well. We've been doing it for decades, and hopefully we can make people feel more comfortable with it.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, great. So let's do this, Rob. To get more familiar to our audience today, be accessible, can you share a little something about how you or why you got into the solar industry in the first place?
Well, I first got involved in it in college, and my university had entered into the GM Sun Race, which was the first one they had. It was a race from Florida to Michigan with a solar power car. And so I kind of got a feel for electric vehicles and solar back at that time, and thought that would be kind of a neat career. And at the time, I thought solar would be a bit of a fad, and I thought the electric vehicles would be the way to go, but I decided to go into solar anyway. And lo and behold, solar turned out to be the better industry at the time. It took several decades for electric vehicles to take off. So I've been in it ever since, and been pretty happy with some of the neat things I've been able to be involved in over the years.
Fantastic. Very cool. So did you actually make that ride from up to Michigan with the GE Challenge?
Yes. The car didn't exactly make it the whole way. Unfortunately, we had issues with it and problems with it. But yes, we did try to run as much of it as possible, and it did okay, but certainly not as well we would have liked.
Okay, sorry you didn't make it.
All part of the learning experience.
Hey, well, we see John Roxy joined in the call. John, hey, welcome back, buddy. It's good to talk to you. John and I have done a couple of solar projects together, and he actually has a very cool solar solution that he does for cities. So very glad to have you here, buddy. Thank you for coming. Keep the chats coming. Ask your questions. Rob is here to answer any questions. And then, hey, buddy, don't hesitate to contribute. Give us some of your input. Tell us what you know, and share the wealth, because that's really what these shows do, and that's where they help. So let's just dive in, right? Let's ask some questions of Rob. So if you have any questions, hit the chat line. Maria will bring them up below. Yes. But Rob, let's just ask the first question, the real basic one. What is solar powered PoE?
Well, it's in its simplest form, it's essentially just a power system connected to usually a PoE injector or a PoE switch of some form. So the only complicated part is trying to figure out that PoE interface and the loads that go with it. But the solar portion is pretty standard and basic, same thing they would use for any off-grid solar application for the most part.
Mm-hmm. And so, really, what it is, in my experience, is it's a crossroads between solar power, which is DC, very cool, direct current.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big proponent of direct current. I know Tesla and I kind of are stand on opposite sides, but it's where power over Ethernet, which is a DC based system, power system, allows you to optimize really what you're doing with solar, because you can gather your power on your solar grid, stores it on batteries, and then that solar power can then be directly sent onto your devices, right? I mean, you could power cameras, Wi-Fi access points, lights, any kind of devices like speakers. And what's cool about it, and then where I find people are really excited and are using it, is applications where you don't have the infrastructure to get power there, but you can get solar, and allows you to expand your footprint while still getting intelligent power. Yeah. Sorry, Tyler went off. Okay. I
That's
gotta
pretty
get
much it.
excited.
That's a good summary. That's a good summary. And the
Okay.
nice thing about the PoE devices in general is, as you point out, they're actually DC based, they're not really AC based. Most of your injectors all have some type of AC to DC conversion in them anyway. So by being able to operate them directly off the DC, they can actually make them slightly more efficient.
Yeah, they make them
True.
more efficient because you don't have the AC to DC conversion where you're taking. And I see this, and it frustrates me to no end when I see this on systems where somebody has a nice solar system, they're collecting the DC power, it's on a DC battery, then they run it through an inverter to convert from DC to AC, to run a few feet and then change it back into DC so they could run a DC device.
Too many steps, unnecessary steps.
So
Yes, and each one of those loses efficiency, ends up making the system 10 to 20% bigger or more just to compensate for all those losses in there, which are completely unnecessary.
and that's not, when you're talking solar, that's not insignificant. We'll talk about it more, batteries more later, but 10 to 20%, that is not insignificant financially or from an infrastructure perspective.
No, you're absolutely correct, and it's very linear. So for every additional watt or amount of energy you need to produce, that exact percentage ends up being an exact dollar amount to go with it. So if you have to increase your system by 10 to 20% to compensate for those things, your price just went up by 10 to 20%.
Wow.
Yeah, so that having that ability to go direct from solar power to DC on PoEs is a big benefit. Well, Rob, let me ask you this: where you have a lot of experience, you've seen a lot of solar projects. Where do you see people using the combination of solar power and PoE the most?
Without a doubt, definitely in the security industry. We see a lot of these on trailers and things that can be mobile. They're great for construction sites where you can set these up and deploy them rather quickly. You have a camera up there. You can do PTZs, infrared, with night vision, things like that. Generally, they have some type of radio that can then transmit back to a facility somewhere, and they can record, monitor all of this stuff. They can also set up audible alarms they need to at these sites. And it's just been a huge application for that, whether it be stationary or mobile. Again, the construction's been very big on the mobile applications, but there's just been a major increase in that in the last few years as more of these PoE devices become more accessible, more user-friendly, more economical. We see more of this occurring, and it makes great sense too. I mean, you've got a lot of money sitting out there in tools or equipment, especially some of the large excavators and things like that out there. Spending several $1,000s to set up one of these portable solar sites seems pretty economical.
Yes, and I can vouch for it. In my previous life before I was with PoE Texas, we had several of these, and it became standard rather to put a camera out there. Even if you had security on these construction sites, you definitely wanted to have a streaming camera.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better than part of the reason why streaming and having it connected are so important is because the data isn't stored locally. There are a lot of options where you can put a camera out there and it will only take a picture or do something for a short little while, buffer the data, and then forward it on. The problem is when you're talking about a large investment, it's pretty easy for somebody to climb, to look up and go, hey, there's a camera and I'm going to throw a rock at it or do something and destroy it, at which point you lose the information. But if you've got that solar PoE configuration where it's powered and it's powering radio to constantly send data back, that data is being transmitted back to a central location where it can't be lost and it can't be damaged. And that's a really big savings. Is that what you find most people are using that for, or what the big value they see, Rob?
Well, it's just to point out, it's security in general, not just construction sites. I was working on recently where an auto dealership was setting up same type of thing. They have found it more economical actually to set up the solar than it was to run AC lines out to some of these remote corners of their parking lot. But it's the same type of thing just in general. Any place you've got security concerns, you can set these up, as you said, with a live stream going back where it can be recorded elsewhere. Sometimes they do have servers on site which also store locally, so you've got the best of both worlds. And we just see that becoming more and more prevalent. The other neat thing going on in the industry, the big change as well with this, is that a lot of the solar companies have gotten smart now and have also integrated remote communications and monitoring and data logging into their devices. So now you can also monitor the solar system as well to see how well it's functioning. So that's one of the major improvements we've seen in the last few years also, is to add that into it. So that you've already got these Ethernet devices on site, it's just pretty simple to go ahead and run an extra line over to the solar charge controller, plug into it, and the next thing you know, you can see how well your batteries are doing, whether you're getting any solar energy from the solar modules, are the cameras consuming more energy than you thought they were, things like that, so you can make adjustments as needed before you actually have a problem.
Very cool. And Rob, is there an industry term for that feature that our audience should know about when they're looking for that and asking for that intelligence? Or is it just pretty much being called different things by different manufacturers?
It's kind of still new, so it's being called different things by different manufacturers. A lot of people just refer to it as Ethernet communications. That's pretty much about it, but different people are calling it different things. If you refer to it as Ethernet communications, that's understood by most manufacturers now.
Very cool. And that is cool. That's a big feature. That's something really important that I know a lot of people would be interested in. And knowing how your system is working, because there's nothing, I was doing research for this. I watched a lot of videos about solar. A big question that a lot of people have is, why is it shut down? It doesn't work anymore. And that's a real problem for solar applications. So I see a lot of value there, like you pointed out. Just having that extra data point to keep your system that's communicating back to wherever you're controlling this from. This is the status. This is what's happening with the equipment and how well it's working. So Rob, take it a different direction. In your professional experience, what are the kinds of projects you do not recommend trying to use solar PoE for?
Well, I think the major thing is cost. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very linear with the amount of power you're using. So if you've got a very large system, all of a sudden it starts to become very expensive, and then you start to compete with utility lines. So if you've got something that ends up being really big that needs hundreds of watts of energy, then like a kilowatt or something, you're going to find that that's going to be somewhere in the thousands of dollars plus range for the solar site. At that point, ends up being more economical to run the AC lines an extra half a mile or a mile or something like that. So I think that's the big thing. I mean, solar can theoretically work for anything. The question is, does it make economic sense? And generally, we see that's where the issue comes in. The bigger the loads, the bigger the power system. All of a sudden, you start competing against other alternates like a generator, especially if it's temporary, or running AC lines out, even if it's temporary. So again, it all comes down to economics sometimes.
Okay. Is there like a lower threshold where you get, it's a small enough device, you don't recommend doing it? I mean, in our work, we've been talking about 10, 15 watts. That's pretty small. I mean, you're talking like a single light. Is there a lower bound?
Well, generally, I mean, the example of the system we were working with before, which was less than 50 watts, I found that generally stuff in the 50 watt or less range, and generally that I power up a small camera, the radio, the losses in the PoE itself, and a few other little things. Generally, you can find that those are less than 50 watts or so, and that usually ends up being just a couple of solar panels and a couple of batteries, and if you're looking on the order of $2,000 to $3,000, something like that for your system, which seems to be pretty economical. And again, that covers most of the applications I can think of. You can get one or two cameras out there with your radio and maybe even power up a server or something like that.
Very cool. Very cool.
What do you think are some of the reasons why people would be intimidated or maybe on the fence about starting a solar project?
Well, I think the big thing is just to know where to begin. I think that's what just kind of concerns people. They don't really understand it or know it. How big does the solar need to be? How big the batteries need to be? How does the stuff go together? How does it work? What happens when the sun goes away? Things like that. So I think that's just the biggest concern is people just don't understand how it works.
What would you say to those people? Where would you tell them to start looking?
Well, I think
Besides
when it
calling
comes to
Rob
Of
sizing
directly,
it,
course, yeah.
well, that
call Rob.
that would be great. No, 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 that would be great. I'd be happy to have that. I have a lot of customers that actually that's what they do. They do all the security. They can do everything themselves. They can even build their own trailers. They can do all that stuff, but they don't understand how to size the solar array, how to size the batteries. And you can go to a solar company and they will sell you a kit and they will do all this stuff for you. But if you've already got the integration capabilities yourself because you're already doing this stuff and you just want somebody to help you put it together, that's who a lot of my customers are. They contact me and I tell them how big to make this stuff, and you can do that. But again, the other alternate is if you're just kind of small, you can go to several of the manufacturers out there. Um, that'd be happy to help you size your solar array, size your battery, and sell you a kit with all the parts you need. A lot of times they'll include a manual or drawings that will show you how to put it all together.
Okay. And Rob, go ahead. Let's call out to a couple of these manufacturers. Obviously, this is not going to be exhaustive or thorough, but let's say somebody is getting into this. Let's give them a couple names and we can throw them out on the chat line. We'll chat with everybody. What are some of the names of the companies that you would recommend looking into? And I'll throw some of those names up on our chat lines.
Yeah, well, Sunwise is great. They've actually helped donate a system to some of the testing we're going to be doing in later videos. So that's one out there.
Shout
Amoresco
out to our
Solar has been
Sunwise guys. Sorry, shout out to our Sunwise guys.
yep. Amoresco Solar, another one that's been around for a long time. Another good one out there. Uh,
AMRESCO.
Ameresco.
Very cool. All right.
Solar Flexion is another one out there. And that's so LAR Flexion, FLEXION.
Very cool.
And then actually the neat thing about Sunwise is they have a great online tool. Actually, they have a great tool there that allows you to actually size it right online. Solar Flexion has a little chart you can do, so it'll say, hey, if your load is this big and you're in this region, because a couple of important things for the system to work correctly is you have to know what your load is and you have to know where you are. Obviously, because the load is the device consuming power, and the location is the amount of sunlight you're going to get, which is the device that produces the power that your load is then consuming. So those two things are the most critical. And again, a couple of these companies have some online tools which are pretty cool. Like I said, Sunwise and Solar Flexion that allow you to actually size it online, and you can click a button and it'll send you over to a system and it'll give you a price right there, and you can just go ahead and order right online. Don't even have to talk to somebody if you don't want to.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, John Roxy here agrees he loves
Go
Sunwise.
throw his comment up.
Yeah,
We can
let's
see
see.
that. We'll yep. John, you use John likes Morningstar as well.
Yep.
So that's very cool. Thank you, John, for contributing that. Now this is always a little dangerous, and you could say no comment here. Any brands or things, maybe you don't even need to name names, but anything you recommend avoiding, so staying away from?
Well, the only thing I'd say is that the solar industry has a lot of companies come and go. Not necessarily just the system companies I mentioned, but more importantly, the manufacturers, controllers,
Mm-hmm.
solar modules, and stuff like that. So a lot of these all come with warranties. And the warranty isn't necessarily from the person you're purchasing from. So the warranty is not necessarily from Sunwise or Solar Flexion, although they may give you a 1-year warranty on the system or something like that. But solar modules typically come with like a 10-year or 20-year warranty or something like that. But if that solar
Mm-hmm.
module company is no longer in business, that warranty is worthless. Same thing with the
Mm.
controllers. Sometimes you might get a 2-year or a 5-year warranty there. But again, if that company is not there to stand behind that product, then that warranty is worthless. And I've seen a lot of that in industry over the years, not just in the off-grid market, but also in the on-grid market as well. Inverter manufacturers and things like that. A lot of homeowners may have problems with their stuff, and all of a sudden there's nobody to contact because the installer has gone out of business or whatever. And then you try calling the manufacturer, and they're out of business as well. So it doesn't matter
Mm.
whether it's on grid, whether you're on the grid or off grid, whatever it is. I think the most important thing is making certain that you're buying the components, not necessarily the person you're buying it from, the distributor, but that those components are from a major company that have been in business for a while, that will continue to be in business for a while. Again, Morningstar is a great example of that. They have been around for many years, been around since 1992. I actually knew the founders. They actually originally hired me back in 1990 when they were doing off-grid systems. So I've known them a long time, and they're a very good company. But there's a couple of ones out there too. I don't want to just focus on them because there are other ones as well. But just make certain it's again, whether it's the batteries or the controller or the solar modules, I'm focusing on those because those are the three most expensive and major components of the system. It's important to make sure you're buying them from a good manufacturer.
Okay, that's good. And let's kind of touch on that, Rob. So the main components of a solar system, right? You and me, Maria. When I think of solar, I'm like, oh, beautiful big
The
solar
panels.
panels,
Yep, that
and
you
I
see
got
on
some here I could
roofs.
pull out and show everybody, and they're just big panels. So
Mm-hmm.
you see them. That's the real obvious part. So what are the other parts of a solar system?
Oh, good
Uh,
question.
and you can see a small one hanging there on my wall in the back. I use it as art,
Yeah, there
actually.
it is, right there.
That's an older model. That's an '80s vintage, actually. But yeah, actually, I take old ones, actually make furniture out of them as a little side project just for fun. Um, but
Is that health code safe? Are you like? Hopefully, you're not cutting your food. Old solar panels as cutting boards or something.
Actually, solar. We're going to digress just a little bit here. Actually, solar modules is really the top surface is just glass. It's just a piece of glass, and they break easily, actually, to some extent. Although they are standards say they're designed to take a impact of a 1-inch hailstone at 52 miles an hour. So 1 inch is pretty big, and 52 miles an hour is pretty quick. So the glass
Mm-hmm.
is kind of thick, but nonetheless they can be damaged and broken. If you were to throw a good sized rock at it or something like that, you can still break them. But that's the top surface, and then you've got a layer of some glue called EVA, and then you've got the solar cell itself. Then you have another layer of glue EVA. Then you have this what they call a backsheet, which is actually polyvinyl chloride PVC type of thing. They call it Tedlar, is one of the manufacturers. So the back sheets can actually be damaged pretty easily too. You can actually cut them or scrape them. But there's really nothing in that that's actually bad for you, because if you were just to use that top surface, the glass, then you could actually, I like it because they make great coffee tables. You could put a glass on it and have a water stain and not care because, again, it's just glass, just wipe it down. So I think they make great end tables and coffee tables personally.
Well, hopefully that
Some
doesn't mean
DIY
there's
projects for all you watching.
yeah. When you're done with your solar panels. So, Rob, you were giving us the breakdown. You got solar panels. What are the other components in a solar system?
Again, the three major components are the solar module, which of course is the device that produces the energy from the sun, the batteries, which store the energy, okay, because you need to store that in order to get through the evening and days of inclement weather when you got clouds, rain, and stuff like that. I might digress just slightly. A good battery, I hear a lot of people think about 1 or 2 or 3 days. The standard is, and Maria said that, as I do work on the standard is you should have a 5-day battery. And again, that's for several days of bad weather and for other things. So in order to have a reliable system, you should have a battery close to or around 5 days. Okay, so it's a pretty good sized battery. So again, you've got your solar panels, this is device one, you get your batteries, device two, and then in between those, you've got your charge controller, that's device number three. And that charge controller has several important functions. One is to make certain the batteries don't get overcharged or undercharged. And then the other thing is to make sure it's going to over discharge, which means you've discharged it too far, kind of leaving the headlights on in your car type of thing. So that's what it does. So it's there to make certain you don't accidentally overcharge your battery, and it makes sure it doesn't get over discharged. So that's it's got a very important function there. The batteries nowadays, because solar's gotten so inexpensive, um, the batteries are almost 40% of the cost of the system. So that's one of these components you certainly do not want to damage. And a good quality battery in a well-designed system can last about 5 to 8 years. So I know people that have poor quality batteries, and more importantly, poorly designed systems, and they're having to replace batteries every 1 to 2 years. So think about that. That's a very expensive component to be replacing. 40% of your cost of your system to replace every 2 years because you've incorrectly designed it or something like that. So it's important in addition to the components, it's also important to make sure it's properly designed as well. If you do all that stuff right and have good components, you should be able to get many years. Again, 5 to 8 years just for the batteries and the system itself. 10, 15, 20 years out of it. I know that's a long time to think for a lot of people. Most people don't think past 5 years. But again, these systems can last that long if you replace the batteries every 5 to 8 or so.
Very cool. And on that topic, do I need to, as a guy who's buying solar, do I need to buy my panels, my charge controller, my batteries all from the same person or the same manufacturer? Or is it one of those things where there are guys who do better panels, better controllers, better batteries? What's the breakdown on that?
Well, they're all three completely separate manufacturers. The batteries are one company, the solar modules another, and the controllers are separate. So you are going to be from three different manufacturers completely. And some of them you may know or you may not know. I mean, you could buy a battery from a company like Exide or East Penn or Yuasa, whatever. They're just regular battery manufacturers you've probably heard of that put batteries in cars. They also make a solar version. It's very important to make the distinction that the batteries used in solar are different than batteries used in cars. They're designed for different application. They have different alloys in them and the plates and things like that. So they're different batteries. And you want to make sure you get a battery designed for solar application. Solar module manufacturers, there are ones out there you've probably never heard of that have been around for a while, and there's other ones you may have heard of, like Hyundai. Hyundai makes solar modules. LG, who also makes TVs and refrigerators, they make solar modules. So there are name brands like that you may have heard of, and some you may not. It doesn't mean any one are better than the other one. It just means that because they're a large brand you may have heard of because they make other retail appliances, they also make modules as well. The charge controller is a little different. Again, we've mentioned Morningstar has been out there a long time, but there are other companies out there as well, like Focus. It's a good company. It's been around a long time as well, and some others. So, and again, they're completely separate manufacturers as well. There are other companies that make grid tie components that make inverters and stuff like that also make charge controllers. Companies like Schneider Electric or Outback and companies like that also make charge controllers as well. Generally, their charge controllers are more designed for grid tie applications, so I usually try to go towards more of the off-grid ones, as they're generally better suited to these applications with the batteries being cycled every day.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to find out. Because you got the batteries are cycling, go for different off-type grid ones. So then, where would I go? Right? Do I go to Amazon to buy these? Do I have to search for each company? Where do I go to find out where to get these? I mean, obviously,
Where to source the component.
Yeah, we've talked about Morningstar, Solar Flexion, Ameresco, Sunwise.
Well,
Go to their websites. Where do we go?
that's a great question. Morningstar doesn't sell direct to the public. They sell through distributors like Solar Flexion, Sunwise, and Ameresco. So, of course, you could go to them and you could buy a system directly from them or from components. There are other companies out there as well, like EcoDirect, Wholesale Solar, and you could basically do a Google search and find dozens of companies that would be happy to sell you components. Some of them do systems. Just be careful about that. Again, some of these ones that do systems aren't as experienced at it as other ones. For the off-grid, they may be great for grid tie, but for off-grid, they may not be as experienced. So do a little research on that. One of the things I do is I when I do the designs for companies, I also shop around for components. I will buy the modules from one company, batteries from another, perhaps a controller from another, to get you the lowest cost you can get. So that's one of the neat things you can do too. If you've done your design correctly, or if you've had somebody help you do that, then you can go shop around and buy the components from whoever you want to and get the
Okay.
lowest price.
Very cool. Very cool. What do you got for us, Maria? Hit us with the tough questions.
I don't know if this is going to be tough for you, but I deal a lot with customers on a daily basis, and I'm also fairly new to solar myself. So, what would I look for in products or devices, whether it's for myself or just recommending, to know whether or not they'll be right for that solar PoE project?
Like, are
Ooh,
we
that's a
talking
tough question.
certifications, maybe, or
Yeah,
standard compliance?
capabilities.
Yeah, or yeah, like the things like you gotta have this capability. If your thing doesn't have that capability, it's not gonna work.
There's not the systems for off-grid are typically not certified, so you're not going to find a certification necessarily for those. However, and for the solar modules, they're pretty much a commodity. No other way to put it. I would say this though, there are different size solar modules. That just mean in terms of power output, but also in terms of voltages. So in other words, they could charge a 12-volt battery or a 24-volt battery or 48. For the PoE applications, generally we're going to focus more, well, actually they could be 12, 24, or 4-weight, depending upon how you want to do your PoE for your nominal battery voltage. I typically focus on the 24-volt, seems to be the easiest ones, the most cost-effective to work with, but you could go for a 12 or a 48-volt one if that's correct. But getting back to the solar modules, they do come in various wattages and in various voltages. And some of those voltages are rather oddball. They're designed more for residential grid tie applications. So I would steer clear of those. I would specifically try to look for a solar module that is designed towards off-grid applications. And generally, they're going to be a nominal 12 volts or a nominal 24 volts directly. So I would
And
say that for the modules.
sorry, go
So
ahead.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, well,
Yeah, so,
that
and for the
distinction and sorry, that distinction of 12 to 20 volts, I'm gonna bring up as the from the PoE side. Rob is pointing out that's nominal. When somebody says 12 or 24 volts, so a lot of people may just be like, oh, boom, it's gonna hit 24 volts. But those batteries actually range quite a bit. The output. So, I mean, what's the range you normally design and expect for when you're
well,
doing your work?
well, that is a good point and a great question. Generally, those batteries can range from, let's say that you take that nominal voltage, it doesn't matter if it's 12, 24, 48. Generally, for proper battery operation and charging, you can range from minus 10% to plus 20%. So what that means is for a 24-volt system, you might find that your battery voltage can range from as low as 20 to 21 volts to as high as 30 volts. So you got to be careful with that because some of these PoE devices may only operate let's say you may have a device that operates from 22 to 28 volts. So that could be a problem if your battery is going to charge as high as 30. You might damage that. So that's a very good point, and that gets back to the whole issue of being able to interface correctly with your PoE device to make certain that it can operate correctly with the solar. So you need to make certain that it can handle that battery operating window of up to 30 volts. Ideally, I'd like to see the PoE, and this is again for a 24-volt application, I'd like to see that PoE device handle up to 30 volts or even higher, just to have a little bit of design margin in there. And it's pretty common to see them operate from, say, maybe even 9 volts up to 30 volts. So you have the option of doing a 12-volt or a 24-volt system with some of those.
Mm-hmm. And on those points, Rob, just with to pay our paid programming, I'll bring up a little bit later our devices that do handle PoE from as low as 12 volts all the way up to 30 volts. And what they do is they put out a regulated specific voltage for the PoE devices to extend the life of your product. So I think that's an important feature where we're talking about the device selection. You can't just go out and buy a PoE switch off the shelf and plug it in. you do want to look for power over Ethernet devices that are designed specifically to work with a wider range of input voltages. And that's a really, really important feature in this whole conversation, because you could pick the perfect solar system that Rob is talking about. You get the right batteries, charge controller, you get the right modules for charging, you plug it into your device, and then you're burning out switches, you're burning out Wi-Fi access points, you're burning out components.
You don't get that lifespan that it can potentially have.
Exactly. And reliability is important in these situations. So, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I don't want to derail the conversation, but that's a very good point.
It absolutely is. I mean, you need to have that interface just correct, and that's where yourself or myself can come in to help make certain that that is working correctly, so that these components are properly matched together, so that there aren't any issues.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about a few of them, Rob. But what's a pitfall or a big mistake that we haven't already covered that people make when trying to tackle a solar PoE project, and how do we avoid them?
Another good question. The biggest problem I see is that most customers don't know what their load is. You might have, as a great example, you might have your PoE switch. It might be 200 watts. They want a solar system that's 200 watts, but that's not needed. As I mentioned before, your camera may only draw 13 watts, the radio 12 watts, and maybe another 3 or 4 watts of losses. And now all of a sudden we're at 30 watts, not 200. So you need to make certain you understand your loads very correctly, because if you don't get it right, you could be spending too much money. As we said before, this cost is very linear. So if you oversize your system by 50%, you've also spent 50% more. It's also important to not undersize your system. I see it happen a lot too. If you've got PTZ cameras that are constantly moving, and you've figured out, well, geez, it says typical consumption is only 12 watts, but it could consume as much as 20 watts if it's moving a lot, and you size for the 12, and it really is 20, you could have your system failing because the load is greater than it was designed for and anticipated. So there's a balance there of being able to not oversize it or undersize it. But I see the greatest failure is just that, of people not understanding the loads correctly, and then being able to size the system correctly. I mean, generally, you know where your system's going to go. You know you're going to install it. So generally, that's not the big question. The question is, well, what is my actual load? How much energy or power is that radio consuming, or that camera, and things like that. So it's very important to understand your loads, understand their energy or power consumption or needs. And if you understand that, then your system is going to work really well. But if you don't, then you're going to either end up spending too much money for it, or having problems, especially in the fall and the winter. I get more calls in November, December with systems failing, and it's almost always because there's a slight problem with the system. Somebody, their load is consuming more than it was designed for, or there's a slight shading issue because there's a tree that has grown up in front of it. That's always a good one. The systems are working great for 5 years. All of a sudden, it's not working now. Well, hey, that tree didn't exist 5 years ago, and now it's grown up and out shading the solar module. So that's another one. But generally, when it's something like that, I usually end up getting good calls in the fall as these things start to show up as the load or it's consuming more than it was designed for, or again, the system's not producing as much for whatever reason. And again, it's usually kind of something's grown up that wasn't there before.
Well, I'll throw a quick plug out there. When you're talking about budgeting and properly giving the right calculation, big plug for PoE Texas. The free PoE Calculator app is on Google Play and the App Store and our website. And it walks you through the process of gathering and calculating your power Ethernet loads. So as that key input to the calculation you're talking about, Rob, to understand your full load, we actually have a tool that helps our customers use it. Now, good news, that tool is free. It doesn't cost you a nickel, and we'll keep it that way because we want to help our customers out finding the right solution. So in this case, it's an added value because not only will it tell you, not only does it help you calculate and make sure your PoE network is right, it helps you calculate a budget so you know what you've got on your PoE system.
And to plug some of these other companies, solar companies as well, like Sunwise or Solar Reflection, as I mentioned earlier, you take that load that you just mentioned, you can get it from your tool, you take that value and you can then plug it into their design tools. They're going to ask you where's the location, ask you what your load is, and your tool can then get the load information, you could take that and directly plug it into the online tools that both Solar Flexion and Sunwise have, and it'll tell you what solar system you need, and there you go.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's just double check the chat lines. John's been participating. He's done a great job here, and he did say he uses PoE Texas adapters to power all of his Ubiquiti radios, and that's an interesting point that you bring up, John. What are components that are best suited for working on a PoE network? We found Ubiquiti backhaul it works well. I know a lot of our audience use MikroTik, another very good product. Rob, any tips or suggestions of things that you've seen work well and don't work well when you're working with solar powered PoE?
Again, I would find equipment that also has low power consumption as well, because as I mentioned before, every watt in power that the load needs, you're going to have to generate an extra watt for the solar. Actually about 8 to 10 watts of solar to compensate for that. So it's very linear. So for every watt, there's going to be more dollars to spend for it. So you want to get something that is as low power consumption as possible, but still works for your application. So I think it's probably one of the key things to look at. You also want something that is going to be robust. It's going to be able to handle the environment and elements, as these things will be not so exposed to the weather, but definitely exposed to temperature extremes and things like that, perhaps even humidity. So things that can handle the outdoor environment. I think those are two of the most important things. That you need to look at with those. And again, even though that device might be slightly more money, if you can save it on the solar end by having a smaller solar array and solar battery, you've offset that extra cost. So maybe it's 10% more to get something that's slightly more efficient. You could probably save that and then some on the solar side as well. So sometimes spending a little more money can be a good thing. It'll save you money later, both in the design of the solar system, perhaps also in the reliability of the system also.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Rob, what do you have for us? Maybe we appreciate you coming on the show. For your audience, for the people you work with, what would be good information for Power over Ethernet that your customers and your audience needs to hear about?
Well, actually, a lot of my customers are already doing this stuff. But again, I just like to let people know that you have the option of, if you've got those integration capabilities, you can do it yourself. You really can. I laugh, a lot of these solar companies that we've mentioned before, their biggest competitors are their customers, because you can just go ahead and go buy the solar modules and charge controllers and batteries and do it yourself and put it together. If you need help, you've got people like me that can help you design it and do the drawings, so you know how to wire it all up. But again, it is quite doable, and if you do it right, it can last a very long time. A lot of the people I work with, I'm surprised to hear how batteries can fail in just a short period of time. Like I said, less than 2 years, and generally they really should last 5 or more. I have to laugh. There's a great quote from a battery manufacturer I used to work with. Their quote was, "Batteries don't die; they're murdered." And I see a lot of that in my industry. I see a lot of murdered batteries because of poor designs or poor applications or things like that. So, again, when it's done right, it works really well. It can be very cost effective. And that's the other thing. If you can, it sounds like a lot of money up front. And that's always the other thing that scares people away. Well, this is a lot of money and things like that. But the truth is, if it's the same thing with the residential system as well. It's no different. I mean, you could put out a lot of money up front, but if you're thinking long term, you will get that money back and then some. In a lot of applications, you could it can pay for itself in as little as 5 years. Just depends on the application. But if you want to think long term, it can actually save you money.
Okay, very cool. Well, thank you, Rob. Thanks for sharing that. And so I'm going to take us to the paid portion of our programming today.
Okay.
And I brought in a couple of guests from our product line. We're about to launch some new videos about products that are specifically targeting the solar applications. Rob has been cool enough to give me a lot of feedback, and so have a lot of guys. Larry over at Sunwise has been great and generous in sharing his time with me and helping me better understand solar. So let's check out a few of these solar projects here. So, for example, we're going to be talking about our we're launching a product. It's a gigabit PoE device. It's an inline device that converts 12 to 30 volts. You can see I'm just running a quick video here. Converts 12 to 30 volts, and we have one that will do either 24 or 48 volts. So I'm going to bring this guy up here. Got my little camera. I got a second view. I'm very Paul over PTZ Optics. Shout out to you. You'd be proud. I've got a second view that I'm demonstrating here, and this is the PoE, the GPoE 48V10W. It'll take in either DC power or PoE power and step it up from 12 to 30 volts all the way to 48 volts. So it's a great tool if you're using an IEEE device like a camera. The other alternative is for those of you who are like John who use Ubiquiti. We have a similar product for Ubiquiti and Microtech that takes 12 to 30 volts and sends it to a regulated 24 volts. And that, like we were talking about earlier, that's really important. It comes with a DC barrel jack and the RJ45 port, so you can have a regulated power. And then, so these are really important and very useful for customers who have that application. Very cost effective. You're talking less than $16, $17 for these two. But for those of you who are stepping it up and saying, look, I need a little bit more reliability, and I also need a little bit more power. We're working with a team to do these PoE injectors. It's as you can tell, it comes in a nice case. It's got 6,000 volt surge protection. It's got a nice detachable plug connector, so you could have two sources terminated to this with the grounding bar. It comes with its own DIN rail mount, and it will do PoE Plus. Now this is the beta one. It's going to go on the test stand, so I can give it a couple tests and make sure that the capacity is what we are saying, which is going to be PoE Plus. So you should be able to get 25 watts out of this guy. And we're very excited about these and supporting our solar PoE customers out there like John, and expanding our product line to do this, because like I said, it's one of the ones that I find customers are most interested in learning about. So those are some of the products that you should keep an eye out for. And let's get back to Rob. So thank you everybody for sticking with us on that one. We're going to bring Rob back, and Maria. So sorry, we're getting to the show part here. We talked about Sunwise a little bit earlier, and then you helped me unload that pallet that Sunwise sent over with all this stuff.
Oh,
so I
yes,
appreciate
it was
that.
a pretty big box.
Oh, and let me get these titles out of the way. Maria, you got to warn me that I've got my camera still on my live feed, so we got Rob back on the screen.
And so if any of you are asking or wondering how to deploy them, first we do have videos and data sheets. If they're not already available, they'll be available very soon on our website. But Tyler and Rob have collaborated on a solar PoE project using the Sunwise equipment that was mentioned and talked about today. So thanks to our friends again over at Sunwise for generously donating that equipment. And they'll actually use these two devices in that video, so be sure to check that out as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So here comes the fun part, guys. Shout out, give us a shout out, talk with us on the chat lines. Let us know what you're thinking and what questions you have for Rob and I, and we're also very interested to find out what projects you want us to tackle. So let's go ahead and we're going to update the chat line. Maria, anybody on Facebook reaching out to chat with us?
We do have Nicholas just wanting to give us a friendly comment saying Sunwise is with the Z, so if you we're looking at the comments from earlier, and you're trying to Google it for some solar help, be sure to search it with the Z.
Sunwise, thank you.
So thank you,
get
Nicholas.
we'll get that corrected on the comments.
Yes.
Very cool. Thank you. You got to keep it right. I mean, you don't want to make
Be accountable.
Oh, yeah.
We want to give Sunwise the credit.
Yes. So thank you, Nicholas, and thanks for joining us today. So I'm going to correct that here. It's Sunwise. IZE. Yep, there you go. So very cool.
And then John is asking us if we'll be posting Rob's info. Um, Rob, I don't know if you gave us that okay to do that.
Please do. Please do. I would just kind
Okay.
of plug my website, solarsystemservices.net. They can find all of my contact information there. So yes, solarsystemservices.net.
And we'll definitely
Perfect.
we'll put up all of Rob's contact information, including his street address, his social security number, and his wife's maiden
His
name.
exact location where he is right now, GPS coordinates, all of it.
Thank you, Google. We appreciate this. Very cool. Thank you.
And there's the corrected spelling again, just for any viewers, Sunwise with the Z.
All right. Excellent. Well, guys, this has been a great conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm coming away much smarter for this. And and what I can tell you is that Rob and I are working on actually pulling off a project together. And we're going to let you see us hammer our thumbs, dive in, make this work with the Sunwise system. So, this isn't just going to be some theoretical, hypothetical situation. Rob and I are doing this together, and we're very excited about it. Like I said, I got the palette of the stuff. I've got the camera. I've got the solar power. Now I need to go get the pipe, and you're going to see me outside hanging pipe and then seeing if I can get this solar camera system up and running. And we're looking forward to having that project come through. So, you know what? Even if you didn't get to comment today, or you're coming to this after the show is re-aired, don't hesitate to leave comments. Rob and I will keep checking on it, and I'll make sure questions that I can't answer we'll get to Rob, and we'll get some good questions there. So John did pop up with a quick question here for you, Rob, and I think really worth asking the question. Do you have any feedback, Rob, on the EMC1 Ethernet module by Morningstar?
Yes, it's a great little device that converts many of their charge controllers, both old and existing, as well as their newer ones, to have this Ethernet communications capability. Really neat device. I think it's been out around 2 years now, roughly, somewhere around there. And it allows you to do that Ethernet monitoring I was mentioning earlier. And so if you've got, the neat thing about the EMC1 is you can actually retrofit some old existing systems with it. It depends on the charge controller. Not all of their charge controllers do work with it, but I'd say probably about half or maybe even slightly better do. So it's a neat way to allow you to monitor that. Now, again, that device is a little expensive, though. I think it's, depending upon your dealer, I think it's anywhere between like $150 to $175. But when you're spending several $1,000s on a system, spending a couple hundred to have that monitoring capability is a pretty cost-effective option.
It's true, and in a lot of cases, you're talking about the cost of a truck roll, right? I mean, you're not just talking about the hardware. You got a technician, a truck rolling out to a remote site. You're now, I don't know about you, but I doubt anybody's doing less than an hour's worth of work to get to a job site, troubleshoot a problem, and even just report back.
Absolutely, it's very true. I've worked with a lot of customers that are able to remotely download this file, send them to me, and I can analyze it. So sometimes we can fix it remotely, and when we can't, at least we can direct the technician of what to look for, what to do, so that we can save time on site or minimize it, or if nothing else, at least eliminate a need for a second trip. You get out there and you don't know what's wrong with it, so now you didn't have the right tools or parts or whatever it is, and you have to go back again. So a lot of times we can take advantage of these things to hopefully eliminate the option of having to go out there. Even if you do, just trying to get it all done on one trip instead of having to do a couple.
Yeah, and a big lessons learned that I've always had, and you can give me your feedback, Rob. Bench test your system. Always bench test your system. Set it up. Make sure it's working before you go out into the field, because every time you roll a truck, and it's just more complicated, especially when you're talking about these solar systems. You're sitting in your office, you're setting it up, and you can get it working and all configured. You find out you're missing a piece, no problem, right? I'm within a rock's throw of a Home Depot, and some Altex, some any kind of a gray bar can hit me in the next hour if I really need something. But you get out into those remote locations where you want to put in your remote solar PoE system, then that's a much more complicated situation, because then you got a 2-hour drive back into town or get back to somewhere where you can get hardware. Amazon Prime now doesn't deliver where you usually have solar powered. So just something to keep in mind. A little tip that I always recommend people: bench test, bench test, bench test before you go out in the field.
That is a great tip, and I have to laugh. Sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's a simple tool you may have forgotten. It may have been I know a thin blade flat screwdriver to get in these little terminals, or maybe it was a hex key needed for some of the large terminal blocks, or something like that. And you're going, oh, geez, I really need that 5/16 Allen key. Geez, Whiz, I forgot it in my toolbox, or something like that. It's always
Mm-hmm.
one of those simple things. You're out there, and that's a pain in the neck that you may have had, just forgot type of thing. So that's a good tip to. Even if you can't assemble the whole thing because some of the parts are big and heavy, at least if nothing else, just go through it, review it, make certain you have everything you need, whether it's wire ties to address the wires, or whether it's the right size strippers or crimpers, or do you have those lugs with you? Battery lugs for crimped lugs for connecting to terminal blocks or the batteries or things like that. And of course, always have extras because no matter what happens, you're going to need an extra terminal lug or ring terminal or cable tie or whatever it is. And you can't emphasize that one enough, having a couple of those little extra spare parts. Make sure you have enough wire length. That's the other thing. I had a installer one time says, yeah, that wire stretcher is pretty expensive, big heavy item. Uh, it is a joke because there isn't such thing as a wire stretcher, but it was kind of funny because it's like if you've only got 15 feet of wire and all of a sudden you need to go 20 feet, that's a serious problem. So you also want to just kind of double check all those things. And again, even if you can't do a full assembly, if you can at least double check your parts, go through it all just to make certain you've thought of everything you can possibly. It certainly is a lot easier in the field.
Yes, and the software. Because I don't know about you, my cell signal at best, if I'm out there in remote locations, I'm sitting there trying to read the instruction manuals and do the setup and all that. Set up, do your software testing, and set up in the shop where you got good Wi-Fi, great signal. Yeah, so always bench test, bench test, bench test, bench test.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely with those charge controllers as well. If you want to configure the Ethernet communications, you may want to configure some of the battery charging settings. Some of these things have got custom settings you could do that you have to plug into with a computer. Absolutely. You're very correct on that. If you could do that before you get out there, that is so much easier.
Excellent. Well, guys, we are at the top of the hour. It has been such a great learning conversation for me. I really appreciate it. But we're going to go ahead and wrap that up. So, Rob, thank you very much for coming on our stream today.
Yes,
it's
thank
been a
you.
great pleasure.
Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So, we're going to wrap this thing up. All right, everybody. So we're going to wrap it up today saying, again, big shout out to Rob. Big shout out to everybody who came today. John and Nick, thanks, guys, for participating. And let your friends know about this. Let your customers know about this if they'd like to learn more and see an expert talking about solar PoE. This resource will be available still on Facebook and YouTube. And join us again March 19th when Tom Sinclair from Streaming Idiots will be here to answer questions we have about live streaming and streaming technology. We had a great guest star, Paul Richards from PTZ Optics. Previous show, this next show, we're bringing in Tom. These guys really made the difference about how we could do live streaming here at PoE Texas, and I really appreciate it. And their insight into how Power over Ethernet and live streaming work together are really important. So if you're interested in live streaming, if you want to learn more about broadcast, streaming technology, any of those topics, join us. Ask the tough questions. In particular, we'll be talking about Power over Ethernet. So really appreciate, shout out to everybody who joined us today, and we will see you Thursday. So
Yes, thank you again, everyone. It was a pleasure. I'm walking away more informed about solar PoE, so I thought it was very good today.
all right, we'll see you guys next time. Oh, wrong one.